Okay, now I can hear it. Sorry, I couldn't hear it before. All right, so again, I'll repeat. Do we have a motion to open the joint advisory board and select board meeting?
So moved. Lynn Fiddler.
Do we have a second? All right, so the meeting is now open. If everybody could please stand, face the American flag, and we'll join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you for everybody for being here. The intent tonight is to go through each of these articles, review them, take questions, and so that way everybody here has an opportunity to get a better understanding of the details of each. I'd like to introduce the advisory board briefly. The members that are here tonight includes myself. My name is Rick Smith. I'm the chair of the advisory board. Sitting to my left is Dan Greeny. Next to him is Brian Crowley, and on the end of the table here is Sherry Costello. So it's nice to be here. Thank you, Select Board, for sitting with us tonight. And I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Fiddler.
Yes, good evening. My name's Lynn Fiddler. I am the chair of our select board. And to my left, we have Steve Darcy, he is our vice chair, and Eric Kelly, our clerk. So I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening and thank you for being here with us. We also have this evening Town Council Bob Galvin to my right, and our moderator Jim Fitzgerald, and Town Administrator Michael Moresco. So thank you to all of you as we get going this evening. I'm going to ask our moderator if he would like to share some remarks with us this evening.
I hope this is working. I've got a little bit of a cold, so I don't want to yell too much. Don't worry, I'm not going to get over you. We've had a couple of very well-attended town meetings in the last couple of town meetings, so it's great to see a lot of people show up. That's one of the things that I always hope to see is a great turnout. We're expecting that we'll have the same coming up, I hope, in the upcoming town meetings. We're going to be a little bit better prepped one than we were last time. We're going to be set up so that we can be here as well as in the gymnasium, so we can take a lot more people. One of the times that Mike says 2,000 people. We had the run, if you were here for the last town meeting, where we had to postpone town meeting until we could figure out if we could fit everybody into this room. So we're being a little proactive on that one, so I thank Michael for doing that. Other than that, this is a pretty extensive special town meeting with 28 articles. A lot of them are kind of co-joined, so there'll be, I'm sure, some lively discussion, and I hope that you all come with open minds and get educated on all the articles. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so what we're going to do now is the sequence here is we're going to go through each article. We'll have an opportunity to have whoever our resident expert is here to speak to the article, the details of it, and also to take questions from the advisory board, select board, as well as the audience, of course. So we'll begin with Article 1. Article 1 is, will the town vote to approve an expenditure of the sum of $129,121.15 from free cash, water retained earnings, sewer retained earnings, or solid waste retained earnings, or transfer from other available funds a sum of money for payment of unpaid bills incurred during the previous fiscal year as set forth on the listing below of unpaid bills, or take any other action relative hereto. Mr. Moresco, do we have somebody here tonight that can speak specifically to this article?
Yes, I'll be speaking on the select board articles. So this is a standard article that you'll see at town meeting, unpaid bills. They are bills that come in after the end of the fiscal year, which was after June 30th. You'll see there is a big list this year. The reason there is a big list, we're going through, as everyone knows, conversion. And with the conversion process, excuse me one second. With the conversion process, along with the conversion process, we have our new financial team. We have Sean Strobel, who's our treasurer collector, and Meg LeMay, who's our town accountant, and they're making sure that we're following all the rules necessary. In order to get bills paid or to expend money, you have to get a quote, make sure you're in compliance with the rules. You have to file a requisition. You have to have a contract, have to have an invoice, and then you have payment. So since we're working between multiple systems, bills do get caught. A number of bills got caught, and that's why we're here. We have the funds to pay, but in order to pay the bills under the laws in the Commonwealth, town meeting has to authorize the payment of late bills. Thank you.
Questions from the advisory board or select board? No questions from the advisory board. Do we have any questions from anybody in the audience? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 2. Article 2, will the town vote to ratify the collective bargaining agreements or other employee contracts with any one or more of the below-listed organizations with respect to the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2026, or take any other action relative hereto? It references the CBA with clerical union as well as the supervisory union. Mr. Moresco?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. These are just very standard. When we settle contracts, we come before town meeting. You see that there is no money required. We're able to fund these with inside our operation for both the clerical and the supervisory union.
Thank you, Mr. Morisco. Advisory board, any questions? No questions from the advisory board at this time. Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 3. Article 3, will the town vote to replace the fiscal year 2024 Schedule A compensation plan with the following fiscal year 2025 personnel bylaw Schedule A compensation plan or take any other action relative hereto? Mr. Moresco?
Yes, this is a standard article that we have every fall at the special town meeting. These are for our employees that are in the personnel bylaw that are not in a collective bargaining agreement. We come before town meeting. We ask town meeting to support that they get a 2% increase, just like the union contracts. So these are the grades and the steps that go along with that 2% increase.
Mr. Moresco, advisory board, any questions?
Yeah, just if you could help me understand who is subject to this increase, like what makes a personnel bylaw employee subject to this new step agreement?
So it's any of the employees that are not in a collective bargaining agreement. So some of our department heads, I don't have a list right in front of me at the moment, but I'll get you the list.
Yeah, that's okay. Just trying to understand if it's a majority of the town employees or a
It's a
minority.
minority of the town employees. The majority of all town employees are unionized.
Mr. Moresco, this is just an even 2% on all of these steps in all of these grades. Is that correct?
That is correct. It mirrors the CBAs for the union contracts.
Understood. Thank you. Advisory board, any other questions? Seeing none, do we have any questions from the audience? We have no questions from the audience. We'll move on to Article 4. Article 4, will the town vote to transfer the sum of $2,552,301.54 from free cash, wastewater retained earnings, water retained earnings, solid waste returned earnings, or other available funding sources is listed below for the items listed in the chart below, or take any action relative thereto? Mr. Moresco.
This is our standard free cash article. We're in the process of getting a free cash certified, so it hasn't been certified yet, but it will be certified by the time we get to special town meeting on December 16th. You will see, so when you look at the chart that's here, the items, there's a number, there's a department, description of the request, the amount of the request, how it's being funded, and if it's being transferred to a particular line item. What's important to note is if you look on the funding source, you'll see that there were a number of old articles that were approved by town meeting that are being closed out. The treasurer and the town accountant went through that, closing those out, and we're using those funds also to cover the requested expenses. You see there's a number, there's security for early voting on election day, there's state mandated accreditation, there's bulletproof vests for our police officers, there's AEDs for inside all of the cruises, funding for a social worker, there's maintenance, as we do every year, $250,000 for the facilities, and $250,000 for the facilities for the school. There's a facility for the RFP for restoration of the roofs. There's funding for a new position in the clerk's office, repair to a fire pumper truck, PFAS turnout gear. Not that we're getting turnout gear with PFAS, Mr. Carrier, but turnout gear that does not have PFAS. It's a request from the acting fire chief. Glucol project at the high school. Folks that were at town meeting in the spring, we funded half of the ESL curriculum for the schools with a commitment that we would fund the other half. So we're keeping our commitment, funding the other half of that. We have a request for 10 new school crossing signals. Those are the ones that are photovoltaic, and we have that. Funding for beach nourishment. Road repairs for the DPW, road repairs for unpaved roads, 3 sanders for the dump trucks. These are the units that sit right in the back of the dump truck. Overtime reimbursement to DPW for additional work that they did to get the playgrounds ready to be open for school. DSW, Daniel Webster Playground resurfacing. We also had the playgrounds all inspected, as folks know, so that's to cover the inspection. We have a generator replacement, and we have some recreational trails for Red Gold Farm. Harbor Master, we have a new boat match, and it's funded. You can see there's a number of items that help fund that. Also, for the Harbor Master Commercial Boom Project for the commercial pier. Recreational trails, path posts to be installed at Red Gold Farm. IT, audio visual, that's the special equipment that we use so that when we hear for the special town meeting on December 16th, the moderator as well as the audience can see what's going on in the gym, vice versa. The people in the gym can see what's going on in the auditorium and have sound and everything else that goes along with that. And then finally, Cultural Council, funding for preparation of summer concerts.
Thank you, Mr. Maresco. Advisory Board, any questions? Mr. Maresco, just a few questions. First, in relation to item number 2, the state-mandated police reform and accreditation. How often does that come up?
Those are requirements every single year to keep the police force certified and accredited.
The social worker position, item number 5, this is a new position?
That is correct. So we have a social worker right now. Our police chief was very foresighted. He got a grant to fund this social worker for us and 2 other towns. That contract's coming to an end. The person has been an incredible social worker. We want to capture that person because the police handle so many domestic calls that require that type of counseling. So at the recommendation of the chief, we're working to get the social worker on board here starting like January 2nd, thereabouts.
How long have they been supporting the town of Marshfield through the grant?
2 years.
2 years?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And how many folks do we have that work for the town of Marshfield that are working under grants and therefore not yet part of the budget?
I will defer to our treasurer collector if he could answer that question. I can't. No. Just a social worker? Just a social worker.
Thank you. The school maintenance on item number 7, I'm sorry, I don't know how I might have missed this, but what is that $250,000?
So we give every year, since I've been here, we put $250,000 in maintenance. It's always been an issue. Marshfield never took care of their properties appropriately and never had the funds. So we have a facility. Now we give them the funds to be able to do. The 250 on the school side goes to, maintenance in school, broken windows, floor tiles, wiring, whatever they need. Same thing on the town side. It goes to maintenance, fixing doors, locks, walls, windows, fuses, ceiling tiles, those types of things.
Thank you. That's all the questions I had. Any other questions from the advisory board? Mr. Maresco, the $250,000 on line 7, just a follow-up question to that, is that strictly for schools, or does that include other town buildings?
No, there's 250 for schools, which is item number 7, and then there's 250 for the town, which is item number 6.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the
You're welcome.
clarification. Any other questions? Any questions from the audience on Article 4? So we're seeing none. We'll move on to Article 5. Article 5, will the town vote to authorize the school committee and or the select board in accordance with applicable law to lease for not less than 20 years and on such other terms as are acceptable to the town and approved by town council surplus space on school buildings and other school properties, including at the Daniel Webster School, Governor Winslow School, Eamesway School, South River School, and Marshfield High School, and also lease on the same or similar terms surplus space at the town's DPW facility and dog park for the purpose of operating photovoltaic installations on rooftops and or carports. And further, to establish revolving funds for each leased property for the proceeds of the leases or rentals starting in fiscal year 2026, which begins on July 1st, 2025. And further, accept the provisions of General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 3, which leaves any balance remaining in any revolving fund established for the rental or lease of a municipal building or property / surplus school building or surplus space within a school building in the revolving fund, and allows the expenditure of the fund for the upkeep and maintenance of any facility under the control of the board, committee, or department head in control of the particular building or property, or to offset utility expenses starting in fiscal year 2026, which begins on July 1st, 2025, or take any other action relative thereto. Who do we have from the select board or from the
Sure.
school and or from the school committee to be able to answer questions?
I'll jump in. So this is the roofs. As folks know that have been coming to town meeting, this deals with photovoltaics. In order to put photovoltaics in any of our buildings, we have to have town meeting approval for the lease. The one thing that's changed now is that we're working with the photovoltaic company, and there is no charge for the town to repair the roof. The photovoltaic company will repair the roof, and we just have to approve the leases so that they can put the equipment up on there. This is a great way to get the roofs repaired. You saw in the free cash article there was money to do the RFP for the roofs. We have to do an RFP. We began the process all over again so that we'd have current data, and we'll go out and bid that out. We're working with the photovoltaic company, but in order to do that, we have to have authorization. When I say we, the town needs authorization to be able to lease the space, whether it's roof-mounted units, whether it's carports, the dog park, any of those places. We need authorization to do that. And when we do the roof, those roofs now are at end of life, as we've been saying. The Daniel Webster in particular is pretty much at the end of its life and needs to be done. And this is a great way to get those roofs done for no cost. So we hope that town meeting will support this. I don't know if the schools want to add anything.
Any comments from the school committee?
No, echoing Mr. Maresco's points, we do have the Daniel Webster School has approximately 1 to 3 years life expectancy left on that roof, and Governor Winslow
Thank you. A couple of questions for Mr. Maresco or the school committee. The first one is this, so my understanding is this would lease the space on the roofs to the photovoltaic company, correct?
That is correct.
And who is the photovoltaic company?
Photovoltaic company is NextGrid.
And is NextGrid a national firm? Are they a state firm? Are they just serving Eastern Massachusetts? Can you provide a little bit of information about the company itself?
NextGrid's been around for a dozen or so years. If I may, Mr. Chair, I can ask Fred. Fred, do you know how long? 10 or 12 years, and this is their business. They do photovoltaics. They were into wind power and some other stuff, so green energy.
Are they a national company? Are they, I mean, where's the majority of their business? Is it in Massachusetts? Is it all over the eastern seaboard? Any?
I'm aware of the business in Massachusetts. I wouldn't be able to answer that question, but they're underwritten by Madison Bank, which is a national bank.
Okay. And how much do we anticipate that the town will benefit from a fiscal perspective per year? Is there an estimate on that?
Well, unfortunately, when we're going to have them pay to do the roofs, we'll get zero money. Where we'll be able to get the money in the project that's already been approved and the town meeting approved, and that is the cap landfill. So once we put them out there, we'll be able to generate. But the revenue that's generated on the school roofs will go into replenishing the money that NextGrid and Madison Bank is paying to have the roofs repaired for the next 20 years.
Okay, so to sum it up, to make sure that I understand correctly, so the objective here is that the solar company NextGrid would put solar panels on top of each of these 5 schools, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 schools on the roofs, and it would provide enough cash flow to NextGrid for them to finance for the town of Marshfield the replacement of each of these roofs to extend their useful life out by 20 years?
That is correct, with the exception of, so Daniel Webster, Governor Winslow, Ames Way, South River. Those roofs will have the membrane put on that will extend the life by 20 years. Marshfield High School is having patches done to the patches that are up there. There's been wet insulation. You know, we use infrared. We hire a company. They come in. They work with NextGrid. They've identified where the wet sources are in this building. Those will be fixed. And the DPW was part of the original project that they would have. Fred, is it just roof mounted or is it carports? Just roof mounted at the DPW, and there would be carports at the dog park.
Thank you. So, do we have I'm thinking out loud here. Do we have a sense of what the total benefit is that NextGrid gives? I guess let me ask another question. Have we done the math to ensure that NextGrid isn't reaping tremendous profits on top of our roofs while they only had to write a check of X millions of dollars to repair the roofs? How confident are we that it's a fair deal, I guess, is the way I'd ask it.
I'm very confident. They're a highly reputable company. So if you don't want to do this, I was opposed to doing this. I don't think it's the right deal for the town. I think it would have been better if the town supported the funding, but clearly the town didn't want to do that. Being a town meeting for 30 years, I'm certainly not going to argue with town meeting. They don't want to pay to repair the roofs. The NextGrid is happy to do that, and it's really, the financing deal is a net present value. So their bank works out what the costs are, and that will cover it. We'll be able to make money. We'll be able to draw a revenue source on the dog park. We'll be able to draw a revenue source from the photovoltaics at the DPW. We draw a revenue source from the police station. We'll also draw, I'm trying to think of where else. Fred, what did I miss? Oh, the biggest thing is the cap landfill, and that's about $1 million a year once it's up and running. And like I said, that's already permitted, leases are already approved, and that project's ready to go.
So this article here speaks specifically to the DPW facility, surplus space at the DPW facility, in addition to the schools, of course. The DPW facility and the police, no, I'm sorry,
No.
the DPW facility and the dog park, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and do we know, since the economic benefit coming from Article 5, the way that this is laid out would go to NextGrid, who would then in turn utilize it in order to ensure that the town of Marshfield didn't have to basically pay out of pocket for roof repairs. What is the expected revenue generation from the dog park and the DPW sites?
I don't have that information, but let me put it into perspective for you. So we're going to go out to bid. The roofs are going to cost, the roof that they want to do is estimated somewhere between $5 and $6 million, Fred, for the schools, the school roofs. But on average, we have somewhere between $5 and $6 million for the whole package. That's what our consultant's telling us. We won't know that until we go out to bid. Of course, you have to go out to bid on that. Now, if we didn't do it, what's the cost? So Daniel Webster and Governor Winslow, those are probably $5 or $6 million roof jobs. Amesway is a much smaller. It's probably the smallest. South River is a little larger, but smaller than Daniel Webster and Governor Winslow. So you're probably looking at, if the town had to pay the whole thing itself, probably $12, $14 million. So they're getting the roofs 20 years life with no cost to the town.
And I'm sorry, just for clarification, Mr. Maresco, $12 to $14 million would be the cost if we waited and did nothing, is the projection?
It would be if we started tackling the schools individually. So as you heard from the assistant superintendent, business manager, we would have to start with go out to bid and do the roof at Daniel Webster. And then we would have to do Governor Winslow, I believe, South River after that, and then Amesway.
And why is there such a difference? So it's $5 to $6 million in roof replacements that NextGrid would do for us, but if we did it ourselves, it'd be twice the cost.
Well, because they're pouring a membrane on it. This liquid membrane will harden, and it's guaranteed for 20 years. If we did the roof, then we would go out, they would have to strip the roof down, rebuild whatever needs to be rebuilt. I'll defer to Fred, our facility director, on if I missed anything.
Basically, if we did a full replacement versus the restoration, you'd have to bring it up to current code installation. That's why it's actually a better product. It's about 130 mils thick, the restoration process, versus a regular roof is about 55 mils thick. So it's almost 3 times as thick.
So why wouldn't the town, in essence, do the same thing that NextGrid would do if the town were to elect to do it itself? Just trying to, but it sounds like if we did the same thing, it would cost twice as much.
If we did the restoration, it'd be the same amount of money NextGrid's going to pay.
Okay, Mr. Maresco said $12 to $14 million versus if they were doing it.
That'd be a full replacement versus a restoration.
Okay, so, but a full replacement would only come into play if we did absolutely nothing and we waited a period of years or whatnot
Correct.
to do it, right? Okay. All right, so if we were to do something about it now and the town chose to pay out of its own pocket to do it, regardless of solar or anything else like that, it'd still be in that $5 to $6 million category.
That's correct.
Got it. But this path allows us to be able to offset that cost through the revenue that would be generated from the generation of electricity.
That's correct.
Okay. What it sounds like, though, is that we don't have a good solid answer on, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is whether or not the economic value that NextGrid is receiving from the sale of electricity to the grid to the utility, whoever they're selling it to, is how much that differs versus what the cost of that $5 to $6 million.
Right, I have to defer to Michael on that.
Yes, that's correct, but town meeting doesn't want to pay for the roof. So what the town meeting has to decide is if they want the roof repaired, the photovoltaic company is willing to pay the cost to repair the roof and extend the roof by 20 years. At that $5 to $6 million, we won't know what the exact price is until we go out to bid. All we're asking here in this article is the lease, the ability to lease, because if town meeting says no, then the roofs don't get repaired, and then the school will have to have the roofs repaired on a schedule that works best for them. This, the benefit to this is the taxpayers are extending all of those roof lives for 20 years at no cost to any of the taxpayers that are in this room. And will continue to generate revenue on places like DPW, the police, and the biggest is the cap landfill.
So I understand that the question is in regards to Article 5, but just if you could help refresh my memory here. The prior articles that had come before town meeting that were rejected came with revenue, if I remember correctly, it came with a revenue generation. It was a revenue generating source. So where the town of Marshfield would pay $5, $6 million, whatever it is, to put membranes on these roofs to extend the roof life by 20 years, but at the same time we'd be getting revenue in the door from these PV systems that are being put on top of these rooftops. Do you recall what the estimate was on the annual revenue generation from those PVs that would be sitting atop of the schools specifically?
No, I do not.
In respect to the PVs, who has liability for anything that goes wrong with them? Is it the PV company? Are they responsible for all repairs, upkeep, and maintenance?
It would be the installer, whoever installs that will have to sign an agreement guaranteeing that the roof, as they stipulate, is for 20 years.
So anything that goes wrong, they're coming out and replacing that and dealing with that free of charge with no additional cost to the town?
That's what will be written into the contract. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. One last question, Mr. Maresco, and thanks for taking the 20,000 questions here.
Oh, no problem.
In regards to the procurement process with NextGrid, could you just give a little bit of a high-level description of what the process looked like in terms of, do you remember approximately how many firms bid for it? And can you give me just a little bit of understanding what that process looked like?
It goes back to 2019. I believe we had 8 companies that bid. Citizens Energy, ESC, NextGrid. I don't remember that far back, to be honest. That's just from memory.
Okay, and NextGrid was the winning bidder, and is that due?
Actually, they weren't the lowest bidder. The lowest bidder was No Fossil Fuel, Mary O'Donnell's company. And NextGrid was partnered with her, and then they bought out a number of her projects, and that's how we got No Fossil Fuel. They were partnered. No Fossil Fuel was partnered with NextGrid, and then NextGrid took a number of, there was a split between Mary O'Donnell and Aaron Kulig. Aaron wanted his own, so they had a breakup, a divorce. They split up the assets, and we got NextGrid.
Thank you. And I said one more question, but I lied. One more question for you or potentially town council. If the solar company, for whatever reason, has any kind of corporate failure, meaning bankruptcy or anything else like that, where they just simply cease to operate, what's our recourse to ensure that during the next 20 years that those obligations that they've taken on will remain?
Robert Galvin, Town Council. We have power purchase agreements that were negotiated through the use of outside counsel specialist in these agreements, and there are certain guarantees contained in those power purchasing agreements regarding the delivery. The town also has, as I remember, some purchase rights with respect to some of the equipment towards the conclusion of the lease. And there are a variety of liquidated damages and other provisions in the contracts, but I didn't negotiate them. I did see them before they were signed and was asked to sign them as the format after our outside counsel approved them.
Thank you. Any questions from the advisory board? The rest of the advisory board, sorry. All right, did I suck up all the hot air in the room? Does the audience have any questions?
Martine Anderson. So the roofs are going to get something to preserve them from the weather. And who's going to put the roofing down? The electric grid people? They're going to do it?
No, we would go out to bid. There would be a bid to hire a company to come in and do it. It would be the financing
Okay.
of how it's paid would be paid for by Next
Right,
Grid.
so the cost, and that obviously is going to happen before the panels get put on top, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and I hope there's no deep snow this year, because that was the big hang-up with the, who's going to shovel the roofs. So, thank you very much for your presentation, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, Laura Brait, School Committee. I see in here that in addition to the school roofs, you have named the DPW facility and the dog park. I know at one point the parking lot of Furnace Brook was up for discussion. Is that no longer a thing?
Not in this particular article.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm speaking outside the scope here, but are there other locations in town that you'll be planning to do that with?
There are others, and we'd come back with that. We wanted to focus on the schools because there was the component about the roofs deteriorating rapidly, so that's why we started with this. We brought this to the last town meeting, so we're just continuing moving forward to see if there's an appetite. If there's not, then we don't do the roofs.
Okay, so then I'm just curious as to why the DPW facility and the dog park are in this article.
Because those are ready to go, so
Okay.
all we need is approval of the lease. This article really centers on authorization to lease that space. So we have to lease the space, we have to have authorization to lease for the DPW, like we did for the police station. Same thing with the dog park. Dog park's ready for installation, just needs authorization for the lease.
So is the authorization based on square footage?
No, it's just authorization to do a lease with them. For the
Okay.
town to authorize a lease.
Okay, so it's not in regards to the amount of space that the panels go on?
No.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, I forget your name here, but he was talking about the revenue that was generated. So the town will be getting additional revenue down the line with the other projects that you have planned?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anne-Marie Sennett. Just a quick question. It's great that they're going to be extending the life of the roof for 20 years. At the end of the 20 years, when the agreement's over with, I'm assuming it's 20 years, if I remember correctly, will they be removing those and replacing the roof so we're not in the same situation 20 years from now with roofs needing to be repaired?
So all of the agreements that would be signed authorizing these to be installed on a roof will come with a decommissioning bond and an obligation to repair the roofs.
Great.
And also, they'll also come with an option to extend the lease
All right,
and
thank you.
potentially do more.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
David Carrier, 34 Outlook Road.
In the contract as we have it, is there included in that the upgrade of photovoltaics, because it is evolving as a science, it is getting more efficient. In likelihood, at the end of the 20 years, it certainly will be ready for upgrade, but I'm seeing stuff out there that which basically saying that there's rapid change taking place within the next 10 years or so on the photovoltaics capability to generate power more efficiently than it currently does. Is there anything kind of incorporating an upgrade clause and characteristic built into these contracts?
The NextGrid and the bank that finances NextGrid wants to make sure that the units that are taking in the power are the best available units. They also do periodic cleaning to make sure they're maximizing the amount of power that they can take in, because it's in their best interest.
But what I'm talking about is the photovoltaic cells themselves are becoming more efficient. I'm sure at the time of installation they'll have the latest and best they can, unless they have a large inventory of something left over. But as this evolves, as it's supposedly going to for photovoltaics, is that incorporated in the contract to be basically having them required to upgrade?
It will be in the contract that we have the most up-to-date when they install them.
But is there going to be a specific upgrade item in the contract itself?
No.
I would recommend you rethink that.
The problem is we're leasing them the space, and they get to decide the specific brand of the panels, and when they reach a certain level of operational inefficiency where they're not making enough money, they'll replace them. If that occurs within the 20 years, they'll do it, and they'll have the right to do that. If it's not cost effective, they will not, and at the end of the 20 years, they'll have to remove them. We won't certainly be interested in purchasing anything that isn't state-of-the-art at the time, so in all likelihood, they'll end up having to remove them unless they're efficient enough for us to make sense for us to buy it.
Well, that's an answer, but not exactly to the question.
Well, that's why I said no. I thought that was pretty clear.
I have one more question, and then I'll stop because I have plenty of questions. But it would, well, I guess a request. I think it would be good for us to understand what the financial benefit is that NextGrid reaps as a result of the leased space on the roofs. One thing that I'm very aware of is that a company such as NextGrid and other energy companies basically acting as a bank and providing lending can come at a much more expensive cost when you really break out what the lending cost is, the effective interest rate that sort of gets baked into it. And I think it would be helpful to understand what the benefit is to them that's expected versus a situation in a scenario where the two are split. So if that's something we can follow up on, that would be excellent. Any other questions? Anybody? Once, twice? Great. Okay, good. We'll go ahead and move on to Article 6. Article 6, will the town vote to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or borrow pursuant to any applicable statute the sum of $1,050,000 for the purposes of funding a feasibility and schematic design study for the potential roof replacement project at the Martinson Elementary School under the Accelerated Repair Program of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and for which the town may be eligible for a school construction grant from the MSBA, said amount to be expended at the direction of the school committee. The MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement discretionary program based on need as determined by the MSBA, and any study costs the town incurs in excess of any grant approved by and received by the MSBA shall be the sole responsibility of the town. Any grant that the town may receive from the MSBA for the study shall be as set forth in the project funding agreement that may be executed between the town and the MSBA, or take any other action relative hereto. Mr. Moresco.
It's actually going to be Tom Miller.
Tom Miller, Assistant Superintendent of Business Finance Schools. This is something we've been submitting a statement of interest to the MSBA for some time. Those of you may recall 10 years ago, we completed a project for the roof at the Furnace Brook Middle School. This would be a similar project. This would be our fourth project with the MSBA. We did a modernization of Governor Winslow, obviously the Marshfield High School, and the Furnace Brook roof. The estimate here of just over $1 million is based on, it's truly an estimate of the roof costing approximately $7 million in total, and the design and feasibility coming in at about 15%. There's a 20% maximum on those costs as determined by the MSBA, but typically they come in the 10 to 12% range. So the 15% is based upon that unknown number of 7 million, that initial aspect there. How the timeline would go, the project would be exactly the same as the Furnace Brook project. If this Article 6 does pass town meeting, we would immediately move into the design and feasibility phase. The MSBA would select a owner's project manager for us to work through that process, and then put together a proposal and a cost estimate that would eventually go to annual town meeting and then eventually a vote at the ballot box. I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Questions for the advisory board? Question, Mr. Miller, the square footage of that roof, do you have any idea what it is?
You don't have it there? I don't have the documents on me. I can definitely get that to you. Sorry.
You said $7 million to replace the roof is approximately what we think.
That's a rough estimate in
Right.
the initial part of the process.
That's inclusive of the $1 million for the feasibility study?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And that's for one school roof?
Yes.
Okay. And how old is the roof?
It goes back. The Martinson School was renovated in 1999, and that's an important aspect of this. The MSBA initially set at the beginning of the accelerated repair process, they didn't have an age on the roof in order to get into the program. Then they set a 20-year period, and then moved it to 25. So we are hitting our 25-year, obviously the roof is 25 years old now, and that's why we were accepted at this time. They actually stopped the accelerated repair program the last couple of years, but when we had wrapped up the Furnace Brook project, we immediately, because it was the same project, we immediately moved to the statement of interest with Martinson, because both of those roofs were experiencing a lot of issues, so 25 years, 1999.
Okay, so the roof is at its life expectancy.
Yes.
And with the roof at its life expectancy now, is there any harm that's coming from the roof at the moment? Is there leaks or anything else to that effect?
Yeah, there's a number of issues. I mean, Fred could probably Fred deals with a bunch of them. We did have a beam. How that was. Or is that there was a beam, the structural beam issue that we had to take care of. There's numerous leaks. There's skylights there that Fred has done a good job kind of wrapping them up. But there's a lot of issues with that roof at that school.
Do you have any idea of what the approximate annual cost is to keep up with those repairs at the moment?
Fred's estimating about 30,000.
Okay. And so sorry for the obvious sounding question, but I just want to make sure I understand the basics here. If we don't repair it and we say we push it off 3 years, other than $30,000 of roof repair, can you give me a little bit of flavor for what it looks like if we kick the can down the road?
I'll let Fred.
Fred Russell, Facilities Director. We're actually, now we're starting to hit the finishes inside, so it's a constant issue with the custodial staff to make sure that we de-water all the leaks and so forth, above the ceiling, behind the walls. It's a challenge, you know? So we want to make sure there's water getting in. Every storm, there's leaks in that building.
Is it impacting students in any way?
No, because custodial staff is doing a great job making sure the water doesn't sit long enough for it to turn into anything that we don't, anything we don't want it to turn into.
In Article 5, when we were talking about that, we talked about a less expensive option in terms of using membranes for the schools. Can you tell me why that wouldn't work here?
Because it's too far gone. It's beyond restoration. The installation's all deteriorated. If you go up there after a rainstorm, there's puddles, because people, when you walk on it, the insulation crumbles underneath you, so it creates little divots around the area. So the floor drains, the roof drains over there, but there's ponding over here because it's settled.
And just for my own history, have we looked at doing a membrane solution in the past when it was possible to do it at some point?
I don't believe so.
Do you know why?
I don't know. I mean, I've been
Okay.
here 6 years. It was beyond. It was due to be repaired 6 years ago. Beyond repair. Certain percentage of the roof is, when it's gone more than 30%, you have to replace it. It's not worth. You have to bring up the current code and so forth. So.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
And Mr. Miller, a question for you. How long does this feasibility study take to complete once the funds are appropriated?
They're estimating that it can get done in 3 to 4 months. So we're hopeful to have it ready by March, so we can present a proposal at the annual town meeting in April.
And how much of the funding is being taken care of, or could be taken care of, I should say, by this grant? What do you expect? Or is it
The
kind of
45% to 50% range.
Okay, so
Yeah.
and then the balance we'd either have to borrow or get from free cash
Correct.
or some other source.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
So I mean, all told, if it's a $7 million roof, we would hopefully get approximately $3.5 million. So we would end up borrowing $3.5 million on top of that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So for the grant, that would be on the whole
Correct.
$7 million or whatever it
Yes.
is. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
And then if anything that in this $1 million proposal, the feasibility study could obviously come in less than that. Those funds, if the project passes, those funds could be rolled into that project as well.
While I'm in a learning mood tonight, this grant program through the MSBA, is that available for other schools that are in need of roof repairs, replacement, or otherwise?
So this is we can go forward with other buildings. Typically, they only, a district the size of Marshfield, we get one project, complete a project, and then can move into another project.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Why is that? Why do we just do one at a time? Is that resources, or is that what the MSBA
I think that's
is
resources
allowing?
at the MSBA. If they
Okay.
they invited, I'm kind of just not exact, but there's approximately 70-something projects across the state. Boston might have 4 or 5 schools, but Marshfield, we've moved along, and typically they're only going to give a district our size one project at a time.
Okay, so that would be their discretion.
That's their discretion.
And they would say,
Yeah.
you're only allowed to do this one
Correct.
with our funds, and then we'll move on to the next one.
We have submitted all those roofs in question in the past with statements of interest.
And did we get any of them?
No,
Funding
just
for another one?
we were submitting Furnace Brook and Martinson at the same time,
Yeah.
along with Daniel Webster and Governor Winslow. Our primary focus was Furnace Brook Martinson, and we received the Furnace Brook project. We complete that project, and now we're focusing on Martinson. So they typically would not work 2 projects at the same time in a district our size.
Okay. So we've applied for all of them. We've got some, not all.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
It was 25 years. Sorry, I can be louder. Is it 25 years? You mentioned that the roof is 25 years old, and that's why it was eligible for this project?
Correct.
So are all of the others that you applied for, were they at end of life, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, there's you might have the numbers there. There's older roofs. The Daniel Webster and Governor Winslow are older than this roof. They just aren't as in the situation that Martinston is in.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the advisory board?
So this article is just to approve a little over $1 million to do the feasibility study. We learn more, and then it may come back to perhaps a town vote and maybe
Exactly.
it's the ballot box on what it looks like to repair the roof in totality.
Correct, and then we'll have all the financial numbers. We'll know our reimbursement rate, and we'll have the full package.
Got it. And in the spirit of not, wasting $1 million, to the extent something comes back, we want to go a different direction. Is there, what do we know about the cost of this feasibility study being over $1 million? I mean, is that sort of standard for this kind of a project? Or?
Yeah, so that we work with this is actually part of the reimbursement as well. So this $1 million, the MSBA it's really a $500,000. It's about 50%, 45 to 50%. So that's also reimbursable as well. The estimate was, again, it's a rough estimate of $7 million for the full roof project, and the MSBA recommends that their low point is 10%, 10 to 12% on average for a feasibility study. Their maximum reimbursement, if the feasibility study goes over 20% of the projected cost, they will not reimburse anything over 20%. So they put a 20% cap. So in selecting this figure, it was 12%. We'll say 15 because that $7 million figure is really an estimate. So hopefully we will come in when this is all said and done. We'll come in under this number.
Got it. Thanks.
No other questions from the advisory board. Any questions from the audience? No other questions on Article 6. We'll move on to Article 7. Article 7, will the town vote to amend Marshfield Town Code Division 2 General Bylaws, Chapter 180, Peace and Good Order, Article 1, Police Regulations, by adding the language set forth in bold type as follows: no person shall drink any alcoholic beverages, as defined in Mass General Law 1381, whether in or upon a vehicle or on foot, while in or upon any public way or any place to which the public has a right of access, or any place to which the public has access as invitees or licensees, or any park or playground or beach or seawall, nor carry or cause to be carried any alcoholic beverages onto any park or playground or beach or seawall, excepting with the advance written consent of the select board, and pursuant to a special license issued under Mass General Law 138, paragraph 14, nor shall any person drink any alcoholic beverages while in or upon private land or private building or private structure or private place without the consent of the owners or person in lawful control thereof. Any police officer or special police officer may arrest without a warrant any person found violating this bylaw or who the police officer or special police officer has probable cause to believe has violated this bylaw. Any person violating this bylaw shall be fined $100 for each offense or take any other action relative thereto. Mr. Maresco.
I'm going to defer to town council on this one.
So earlier in the year, there was a event that occurred in public property where there was a division in the town about whether it should be allowed to take place or not, and this provision of the bylaws was cited. It's our general prohibition on allowing people to drink alcohol on public property. After a survey of all of the other localities close to us, it was pretty clear that Marshfield was doing what other towns were doing, except that their bylaws specifically said that that type of activity could occur with the permission of the select board and provided a special license was issued, which is a one-day liquor license. So this bylaw now looks very similar to all of other abutting communities' bylaws, and Situate passed it last night. They're the only ones that hadn't. Situate has Heritage Days. Many people have been to Heritage Days. They used to, or they have always allowed I guess a microbrewery to sell alcohol in a designated area at the town pier in Situate. But observing what was occurring in Marshfield and looking at their bylaws and then comparing their bylaws to the other communities that I compared with, Marshfield and Situate have making this change. So this will allow the town to lawfully authorize a block party in a public way. It will allow the town to lawfully authorize the use of other public property as long as there's consent and a special license issued. It solves a lot of problems that the evolution of the way we think about it, this particular activity is now apparent to us. Some of these provisions date back to when the state even had blue laws about no alcohol being sold on Sundays and certain hours. So this is kind of the modern view of how this should be regulated if it's to be allowed at all.
Thank you. Any questions from the advisory board?
Does this extend to the schools as well, like school playgrounds, you know, Marshfield High School parking lot during a football game?
I'm pretty sure that the high school has a zero tolerance policy for alcohol on any school property, and that's done by its own rules and regulations.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions from the advisory board? Having none, any questions from the audience? Having none, we'll move on to Article 8. Article 8, would the town vote to amend Marshfield Town Code Division 2, General Bylaws, Chapter 180, Peace and Good Order by adding a new Article 7, Park and Playground Construction and Reconstruction, paragraph 180 through 20 and 180 through 21 as follows. Paragraph 180 through 20, purpose. It is the express purpose of this bylaw to require all new or existing parks and playgrounds in the town of Marshfield to be constructed or reconstructed in a manner that meets or exceeds any federal and or state accessibility laws and regulations, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the state public accommodation laws, and the rules and regulations of the Architectural Access Board to the extent required. And then paragraph 180-21, requirements for parks and playgrounds. No parks or playgrounds shall be constructed, remodeled, or reconstructed without written approval of the building commissioner, the DPW superintendent, the facilities manager, and the ADA committee, if any, to ensure that all new construction or any remodeling or reconstruction on or at any town-owned parks and playgrounds meets or exceeds any federal and or state accessibility laws and regulations, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the state public accommodation laws, and the rules and regulations of the Architectural Access Board to the extent required. Said written approval shall be required prior to the commencement of any work or take any action relative thereto. Mr. Maresco.
I'm going to defer to town council on this one also.
So during this past year, it became apparent that a number of our playgrounds were not in compliance with the Americans with Disability Act and the rules and regulations of the Architectural Access Board. The particular officials and departments of the town that are mentioned to this are the persons and officials that are responsible for parks and playgrounds and their compliance with these state and federal laws and regulations. And this bylaw is intended to affirm that we believe that whenever work is done to repair or construct new parks and playgrounds, that it should be done in compliance with federal and state law and regulations. And these are the persons that are going to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. Questions from the advisory board? No questions from the advisory board. Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 9. Article 9, will the town vote to authorize the select board to declare available for disposition a certain parcel of town-owned land located at 1929 Main Street, Marshfield, Massachusetts, also identified in the Marshfield Assessor's Map as parcel D180205, containing 0.8 acres of land, more or less, for affordable housing purposes, and further to authorize the select board to dispose of said parcel by sale, conveyance, or otherwise under such terms as the town may specify, consistent with applicable legal requirements, or take any action relative thereto. Mr. Maresco.
Thank you. This article, folks may remember a couple of years ago, the town purchased a piece of land at 1929 Main Street. During the agreement, it was written into the agreement that there'd be some affordable units there. There's actually a house, if you drive by right now, there's a a very old house there. This will allow the Select Board to declare it surplus. It's under the care and custody of the Select Board. Once it's declared surplus, then it would go to the Affordable Housing Trust, and then the trust would make arrangements to have an affordable unit built there.
Thank you, Mr. Maresco. Questions from the advisory board? Seeing none, any questions from the audience? There are no questions from the audience. We'll move on to Article 10. Article 10, will the town vote upon the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee and the Open Space Committee pursuant to the applicable provisions of Mass General Law 44B to appropriate the sum of $228,900 from Community Preservation Fund Open Space Reserves to fund design, engineering, permitting, and the preparation of cost estimates for future construction needed to expand the South River Park to include a certain parcel of vacant town-owned land located at 2160 Ocean Street, Marshfield, Massachusetts, and identified on the Marshfield Assessor's Map as parcel G080502, acquired by the town in December 2023, or take any other action relative thereto. Do we have a representative from the Open Space Committee or Community Preservation Committee that can speak to this? Yes, ma'am.
So this funding request...
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself?
I'm sorry, Susan Karen. I'm the chair of the Marshfield Open Space Committee.
Thank you, Susan.
So the point of this funding request is to try to fund the design, permitting, and 100% design, bid documents, and cost estimates for eventual construction of the park to expand the park to include the larger one. And the point of this is just the continuation of the major goal of the South River Park and Greenway project, which is to improve ecological conditions along the South River. It's, as you can see, I don't know if you've seen the parcel, but it's very degraded with concrete, and it's not what you would want to see for a riverfront property, and we would like to completely restore that with native vegetation to improve conditions along the river. The goal is ecological restoration and public access. All improvements will be ADA accessible as the park it abuts will be, continues to be.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions from the advisory board? Seeing no questions from the advisory board, do we have any questions from the public? Seeing no questions from the public, thank you very much. We'll move on to Article 11. Article 11, will the town vote to act upon the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee and the Open Space Committee to appropriate a sum of $50,000 from Community Preservation Fund Open Space Reserves for unknown owner title searches or take any other action relative thereto?
This article is a result of work with the planning department. We're trying to increase the town's the GLAM calculation, the general land area minimum, which is the number used which determines whether or not the town meets the threshold for 40B developments. It will also, getting all of this land under town control helps the CRS, the floodplain permitting, by having a lot of these properties are in the floodplain, and the town gets credit for that, which affects the people who have to buy floodplain insurance. And it also meets the goals of open space. A lot of these parcels are of a high conservation value, being in the floodplain with multiple wetland resources on them. And these will be title searches, and they'll do the work to determine which parcels we can take. You can't take a parcel unless you know who you're taking it from. So that's what the funding is for.
Very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Questions from the advisory board? No questions from the advisory board. Do we have any questions from the public? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 12. Article 12, with the town vote to amend the Marshfield Town Code Division 3 zoning bylaw chapter 305 to add a new Article 16 MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District as set forth below, or take any other action relative thereto. I'm assuming nobody wants me to read this aloud. No, I heard a yes. All right, let's go. Just kidding. Who can speak to this? Can you? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Greg Guimon. I'm the town planner. So Article 12 is the main text to the MBTA bylaw. This had gone to the previous town meeting. The area that we're talking about is still the same area, School Street on the north side of 139 to direct Granite. The difference between the state guidelines and what the town's zoning proposed is we're using the B2 district instead of creating a whole new district as an overlay. We're capping the height to 4 floors. The state allows 6 floors. We're capping the density at 16 units per acre. The state only has a minimum of 15 units per acre. So therefore, someone could come in with 25 units if you don't cap it. So we made sure we capped it. And most importantly, the Water Resource Protection District requirements for nitrogen loading and lot coverage stay in place. And we have checked with the state, and they are okay with that. Remember, the town's water nitrogen loading standard is more restrictive than the state's. The state is 10 parts per million. Ours is 5. So if we approve this district and somebody was to come in and buy some of these properties, knock down the current buildings, and proposed a new development, they would need to come in with their own wastewater treatment system or enhanced private septic system that meets those nitrogen loading requirements. There was comments from last town meeting. Did the planning staff look at any other locations? We had previously. We went back and looked at one more location, and that was on 139 east of the downtown from McDonald's Funeral Home to White Holland Drive. Now that district has a number of the state excluded land areas, meaning wetlands, floodplains, and a number of other issues. In order to get the number of units that would be required by the state, we would have had to reduce the lot size from 30,000 to 10,000 square feet. We'd have to add an additional floor or to the buildings, make them 5 stories, or we would have to have a higher density up to 19 units per acre in order to get that same number at that location. As we mentioned, while it does have the GATRA route and it has municipal sewer, it's also floodplain, wetlands, and those excluded areas by the state. This section of 139 only has 2 lanes and no turning lanes and no traffic signals. So the planning staff did not decided that that was not a better choice than what was originally proposed. Text changes from the previous one. There were, in several locations, we added language to clarify that the bylaw was exempt from the existing town's site plan approval process, which is section 1205. We changed some of the GATRA language around. We also completely removed the fee in lieu of. There was some questions at town meeting about the fee in lieu of. By doing that, we're saying that the developer has to locate the affordable units inside their own development. And we have language that they have to have 10% of their units affordable. So the initial MBTA communities language that was proposed by the state did not give towns the ability to address affordability. They did modify it based on community input from the various towns. They allowed 10%, we're going for the 10%. I could go on for quite a while, but I'll leave it at that. Those are kind of the highlights of what's going on with our bylaw, what are the changes from the previous town meeting, and where we stand with the state.
Thank you, sir. So some questions I'd like to kick off with. First, Mr. Hammond. Well, actually, not Mr. Hammond, Mr. Maresco. Believe we've already voted on this article at previous town meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what was the outcome of that vote in specific numbers? Do you have that information?
Well, it was a no vote. I don't remember what the numbers were.
Okay, thank you. How long has the planning board been looking at this?
Almost 2 years. We've been, the minute the state announced it, we realized we had a potential, concern with multifamily housing, zoning, even though we were not an MBTA community. So we have been on this from day one when the state announced this.
And just out of curiosity, high level, how many hours do you think the planning board has spent on this? Are we talking 1,000+ hours? Or are we talking 10 hours?
It was definitely more than 10 hours.
Okay, thank you. The planning board took a vote on this most recent language, is that correct?
No, the planning board has not taken a vote. We had a public hearing that was wrapped up last night. We had some last-minute comments on the ADU bylaws. So the board has not voted on any of the zoning articles. They will be voting on them on December 2nd. They wanted to look through all the comments that they got on the ADU, accessory dwelling units, sorry, and then they were going to vote on all their articles.
And if this passes through the planning board, at that point, it would stay on the articles for the agenda, but if it doesn't, it would be retracted, is that correct, or no? It would stay on regardless. Okay, understood, thank you.
But it would not have a planning board recommendation. So the planning board's vote is the planning board's recommendation to town meeting on all the zoning articles.
Understood, thank you. Mr. Maresco or Mr. Galvin, if I understand correctly, there's been several towns throughout the Commonwealth that have voted down similar types of articles within their own towns. My understanding is that that's sitting before the Massachusetts Supreme Court at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do we know where that case stands at the moment, Mr. Galvin?
We do. It's under advisement at the Supreme Judicial Court.
And do we have any expectations of when they will make a ruling?
They have, I believe, 120 days to make a decision. I think they're pretty well aware of the fact that there are a number of communities that have made it pretty clear that they are looking forward to that decision, so they have some other guidance, but it hasn't come out yet. I think we picked this town meeting in part because we were trying to give the court as much time to rule on it, given the significance of this article and the way the town voted previously. There have been some other developments, though, that are pretty important. I watched the entirety of the argument at the SJC by the Attorney General and the attorneys for the town of Milton. I've read maybe 20 briefs that were filed, either in support of the new law and the way it was being proposed to be implemented or opposed to it. I've been paying attention to what's going on at the legislature, and the legislature has responded in part already in order to satisfy some of the concerns that the town of Milton had. And I'm convinced, in part because of the legislative action, that it's appropriate for this to be considered again by the town. And while I agree that Marshfield has a bylaw that is topically similar to other communities' bylaw, I think Marshfield's bylaw is unique. Marshfield, through the efforts of its planning department, Mr. Giemond and Ms. Horn, have gone to extraordinary lengths, and he's being bashful about the amount of hours that he spent, finding a location which qualifies and would be acceptable to the Attorney General's office, where it's unlikely we will ever see any units built under this article. Last night, the town of Duxbury voted overwhelmingly against it. I think Duxbury voted based on comments that I heard from attorneys that I trust who attended that town meeting, that people were concerned that it will actually be built in Duxbury because of the locations that were selected by the people that were involved in the planning of their article. I know for a fact some of that land are large open space parcels where There are not any necessary limitations on this type of project being built, so I don't view Duxbury's article is nearly like Marshfield's article. I think I think Mr. Geeman and I, when we first saw this coming out, initially thought it wasn't a big deal, and we didn't mind if the town didn't get grant money under the originally stated grant programs, because those were not grant programs that we had traditionally received a lot of money on. Doesn't mean we would never receive it, but one of the original ones was MassWorks. In response to Milton's lawsuit against the Attorney General and concerning this legislation, just this past week, the Economic Development Bill identified 13 or 14 other grant programs that are far more impactful to the town of Marshfield, where we've received likely millions of dollars in the past and want to receive millions more in the immediate future. The legislature responded in the way they did because Milton was arguing in the SJC that the town could only be punished by suspending its ability to receive grants under those 4 identified grant programs in the original legislation. The Economic Development Bill identifies 13 or 14 others, which the state's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities had promulgated a guideline saying that the town should also not receive or be eligible for grants on. One of Milton's major arguments was that the executive office could not promulgate guidelines expanding the grant programs that Milton could be punished with. So the legislature, while the matter is still pending at the SJC, has fixed that. And they said these number of other grant programs that Marshall and many of the other communities depend on for very important public works projects, seawalls, dredging, improvements at piers and along the waterfront. I believe some of the money that's been given to us for beach nourishment and a whole host of other programs that are more important to us are now programs that we will not be eligible to seek our grants from. So no one that I know is happy about what's happened here and the position that the town has been placed in. But the one thing that everybody has to understand is no one is saying that that law is illegal. They're only questioning the manner in which it's been implemented and what punishments can be dealt to towns that don't comply. I can't tell you, and no one can tell you what's going to happen at the SJC, except for the fact that the law is going to be upheld, because no one's questioning its validity. I can tell you with reasonable assurance that the Attorney General's office has broad authority to enforce any state law, and that at some point Marshfield will be asked to comply with that law. I don't know in what format, whether it will come as a demand or a lawsuit, but it won't occur until after the beginning of the 2025 year. In Milton, the Attorney General's office has asked for the appointment of a receiver to find a location of the town of Milton, in the event Milton doesn't find one on its own, to have this district. Milton is different from us because they're an MBTA community with a commuter rail station. Even though they technically don't have a high-speed train station, they have a leg of an orange line that has an above-ground trolley, and they're arguing about whether that's really a high-speed train, which it isn't if you've ever ridden on it. But in any event, it's possible that the Attorney General's office will ask that a receiver be appointed for Marshfield if Marshfield chooses not to create this. It's also possible they'll ask the courts to do what they've done in a number of other areas where towns have refused to comply with zoning, and that is to say it can go anywhere someone could build it in a residential zone until the town comes up with a place to put it that's compliant with the law. It's done that in the case of adult entertainment districts. It's done it with solar power. These are orders that have been issued from courts where towns have violated or been unable to come up with a plan to comply with zoning regulations. It's not a threat. I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. I can't tell you what the Attorney General is going to ask for, but the law is going to be valid, and that's a certainty, because no one's challenged it. Milton hasn't challenged it. None of the lawyers that I talked to, my colleagues at other firms that represent city and towns, no one is challenging it, because it's clear that the federal government tells the states what they can and what they can't do, and if it doesn't regulate something, the state gets to regulate it, and the state treats the towns the very same way. If the state regulates something, the towns can't adopt a regulation that's inconsistent with state law, and there's a whole bunch of things that the state has left up to the towns to regulate. And one of those areas that we've traditionally heard is zoning. But there are limitations on zoning, and this statute is a limitation on the town's right to zone for itself in order to address, in the state's view, the lack of affordable housing opportunities. Now, this isn't an affordable housing law. It's intended to create more housing, which is intended to bring down the cost of housing. And again, I don't like it. I don't know anybody that really is jumping up and down about this whole thing, but I think that the planning staff deserves a lot of credit for coming up with an area where we are not impacted as a town because it's unlikely to be built. Is there any guarantee that Mr. Quirk won't sell his 10-acre dealership and convert this over? Well, he spent several $1 million building that dealership, and by all accounts, this is probably one of his most successful dealerships. It's unlikely that he's going to borrow $75 to $150 million to build 4-story apartments, because he won't be able to dispose of septic in a manner that will comply with our bylaw. And is it likely that any of our apartment communities are going to take down their 4-story or 3-story buildings just to add another story? It's not economic to do so. No one would do that. And again, I have yet to meet somebody that says this is the greatest thing ever. I don't think anybody thinks it's a good thing, but I can tell you, I think the town's done the very best it can to choose a location which meets our requirements and preserves our ability to apply for these other grants. And I'd like to hope that we'd keep an open mind about it. And I certainly get it. I mean, I'm the town's lawyer. The best thing that could happen is if we say no and we go to war over this thing. But in the end, you know, I think we have to think about what's good for all of us, and we try to do the best we can for everybody. I think it would be tragic if we didn't vote in favor of it and the worst case scenario happened, which I don't think it's worst case, and I think it's a potential scenario. I don't consider it worst case. And someone goes up to the wrong neighborhood and tries to put 15 units or 16 units per acre in a development. And it would change the character of some neighborhoods immensely if this was done in the wrong location. Everybody knows how upsetting the 40Bs already are. This is probably better because we can still apply some local regulations to these types of projects. I consider 4 to be the worst alternative that we're forced to accept. But because of the efforts of the Planning Department and the Zoning Board of Appeals, we're now over 10% housing, and we've received safe harbor protection, at least on a temporary basis, and we're trying to get a permanent safe harbor protection so that the wrong neighborhood doesn't get the wrong type of development. And I just hope we would never have to face the day where that would occur here. So I know I've spoken far too long, but I'll probably have to say this at town meeting again. So, you know, do the best what you think is right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galvin. You said that the SGC is not ruling on the legal authority of the Commonwealth. What are they ruling on?
They're ruling on the issues that were challenged by Milton, which were how the law is implemented. Milton is claiming that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities exceeded its authority by adopting guidelines which should have been adopted as regulations and expanding the grant programs that Milton is excluded from. That's one of their principal challenges. They're also arguing about whether their trolley system is actually a high-speed train or an MBTA community. It makes them an MBTA community as opposed to they should be characterized as an adjacent community because it affects the number of units that have to be authorized. I do think that they're probably challenging the appointment of a receiver. And what people don't really know is that Milton is actually working really hard to try to come up with another area that meets everybody's goals and objectives. There's a lot of people that are unhappy in Milton, and I represented a group of abutters to a 40B project in East Milton, and if you've driven through East Milton, whether it's on the highway or on any of those roads, and you lived in East Milton, you know how unpopular it would be to have more units built in East Milton. And that's precisely where Milton was attempting to locate some portion of their district. So there are a lot of upset people there. And we do have traffic in Marshfield. But Milton's and East Milton's makes ours look like nothing.
So to make sure that I understand it in simple, non-legal terms, the SJC, the challenge that's been put in front of them is whether or not the state is illegally withholding grants, funding, et cetera, as a result of Milton's unwillingness to comply. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm not sure they're withholding anything yet, but they've told Milton that they're excluded from the 4 grant programs that were identified in the statute, and they've told Milton that by guideline they consider them ineligible for grant programming under these 13 or 14 other grant programs. So Milton is claiming that they had no right at that state agency to declare them ineligible for anything other than the 4 grant programs in the statute.
And these are just grant programs. Are there other ways that the Commonwealth could attempt to penalize communities that reject? Yeah,
well, I said declaratory judgment, and for the non-lawyers here, they're seeking a order or a judgment of the court that the law obligates Milton to comply, and they're asking for the right as the Attorney General to be able to compel them to comply either by the appointment of a receiver to develop this area in the town of Milton or otherwise. And that hasn't been done yet because it's still challenging the fundamental, probably flaws in that legislation, which if they had taken more time and thought about, could have been avoided. This economic development bill that's in front of the governor right now is remedying one of the flaws, and that's because they didn't identify the grant programs that the state agency is now saying Milton is ineligible for.
Thank you. Mr. Galvin, not to call into question what you said, but Mr. Geeman, question for you. Mr. Galvin characterized the work that you've done as being one is to minimize the impact on the town of Marshfield. When the town planning board went to look at how to address this, was the objective to be both in compliance of the state law as well as minimize the impact to the town? Was it both?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to play out just 2 different scenarios to make sure that I understand this completely. One scenario is that it gets voted down by town committee again. In that scenario, can we change that vote after, because you said that the current law has a time limit established of 12/31/2024, so the end of this year, New Year's Eve, when towns must comply with it, and if they don't, then they're subject to receivership or otherwise, whatever that may mean. So in the case that town meeting goes to vote and again votes it down, is there an opportunity on January 5th or in the April town meeting to rescind its vote and to approve those articles, that article?
I would say yes. There would be another chance if it's turned down, but we might be working under the order of a court that told us to do it and says or else. When this came up before a town meeting, I called the chief of the municipal bureau at the Attorney General's office. It's someone that I've known for 32 years. I asked what would happen if Marshfield fell out of compliance. And she said that the first thing would happen is after the deadline for compliance, and we're still in compliance today, we will not be after December 31st unless we pass a bylaw that's acceptable to them. I asked what would happen, and she told me that sometime after the first of the year, probably during the first week of the month of January, we would get a letter from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and we would be suspended from any potential grant programs that were identified in the statute and were otherwise identified then by guideline, now probably by an amendment to state law. And then about a week later, the town and any other town that hadn't complied would probably be the subject of a lawsuit. And the lawsuit would be to compel compliance with the community, the MBTA community's bylaw. I'll tell you, I'd fight like hell, and I think everybody in town would want us to fight like hell if somebody was going to appoint a receiver to tell us where this was going to be zoned. I think the bigger threat is what happens if they say it can go anywhere, and we're not going to tell you where it's going to be, but it could be in any residential zone. That's a scary proposition to me, and it doesn't involve the appointment of a receiver. So I hope that's not the option that is selected, but it's certainly something that could happen.
So to make sure that I understand again in simple terms, so town meeting could elect not to approve the article,
Yep.
but then at some future time could elect to approve the article. However, at that time, there may or may not have already been actions taken by the Commonwealth that might be irreversible or hard to change or whatever.
There is a distinct possibility, and I'll only say possibility, and that's not a good legal term, that we might not have as much control over where it is after we fall out of compliance and when we're in a lawsuit.
If I understand correctly, again, going back to the SJC discussion that's happening right now, and I'm sorry, one question on the SJC ruling. You said that they have 120 days. 120 days from when? When is that?
The date that they heard oral arguments at the beginning of October. So, November, December, January, February. They could take until February.
Until February. Okay.
Correct.
So it could be.
My guess is that they will not take that full time because it's the worst kept secret that everybody wants to know what the result is. And the legislature, already sensing that a portion of the statute and a portion of the actions of its state agency were at issue, has already cured that by officially naming these additional grant programs in legislation that will also be disqualified from.
My understanding is that the grant programs currently in Marshfield only fund a very small portion of programs and whatnot, but I've heard a lot of discussion out amongst the town with different citizens and whatnot regarding potential threat to seawall funding and other things that could come into play. Can you give me a little bit of a flavor of why that comes up, and is there any validity to it, or is it just simply an empty threat?
Yeah, I can't tell you the amounts of money that we've received, but I know that when we do any dredging in the rivers, that's fully dependent on dredge money from the state under Seaport Economic Council grants that we receive. I think the harbor master has a plan to improve the town pier project by elevating it to response to climate. That's a several $1 million project. We would be heavily dependent on Seaport Economic Council money for that. MassWorks grants are public infrastructure grants that the town would be eligible to apply for to help us expand water or sewer, or to do things that would help us continue to maintain our tremendous water supply that's everybody is very proud of. All the towns around us have been getting these types of grants in order to deal with water and septic issues and clean water issues. I know that we're currently in, this economic development bill was announced and passed and is on the governor's desk. It hasn't been signed yet, but I read it for the first time when I was made aware that it contained provisions that would impact Marshfield. So I think we're going to try to give the community a very accurate recitation of what past grant monies we've received under any of these grant programs and what future plans we would have that would implicate these monies, so we give the town's voters the accurate answers as to how it would be impacted, both looking retrospectively and prospectively in the future.
When we discussed Article 6, Mr. Miller testified that we would be getting, well, we would hopefully get some portion of the little over $1 million, or actually the whole project, so which was around 7 million or so, thereabouts that we think right now, as a grant from the MSBA. Would that grant be subject to potentially being withdrawn, or?
I did not see that on the list of grant programs that we would be disqualified from.
Okay. Okay, so one scenario is that town meeting votes it down again, and at some future point could vote to pull it back. However, there's the potential repercussion that the state may have already, Commonwealth may have already moved forward with actions that become very difficult or challenging to overturn. On the flip side of the coin, if the town meeting votes to approve the amendment, and the SJC comes around in the middle of January and says, you know what, this law is it's legal, but town of Milton, I'm sorry, or I'm glad to tell you that the state can't take your grant money away, in essence. If town meeting decided, or a member of the town decided to put back as an article for the April town meeting that we wanted to go ahead and vote on it again and then vote it down, would the town have the ability to do that?
Yes.
And what would be the ramifications of that? Would there be any work or money that's already being spent between now and that next town meeting that we would have given up, or other risks?
It would be highly unlikely that anybody could permit a project that quickly, because we'll know probably by February at the latest what the SJC is going to do. And under the scenario that you've just envisioned, that maybe the law is flawed in some way, shape, or form, and we've passed it, what would happen? The planning board would probably sponsor the article to rescind the MBTA communities, and I'm not speaking for them, but again, they're just like all the rest of us. No one really likes this. They'd probably sponsor an article, and the date they publish notice of the warrant article to rescind this bylaw, if you don't have permits in hand to build a project, you're bound by the change in the law that occurs at the subsequent town meeting. So it's highly unlikely, less than probably a 1% chance you could get all the permits and approvals in place in the 2 months of the year before the planning board would promptly publish notice of a zoning change to get rid of this article. I cannot envision a scenario that's likely where that would happen. So I think we would have plenty of time, and we can also hold a special town meeting. Maybe we don't want to wait till April. We find out that this law is fatally flawed, depending on how people view this, maybe we'll have another special town meeting and it'll be just to get rid of this law as it applies to us. But again, our town meeting's pretty early in the year, and again, I can't envision a likely scenario that someone could design a project that would comply with the water resource protection regulations that could be permitted before the planning board could act to begin the process of rescission.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Galvin. So just to restate and make sure I'm 100% clear here, there's really two options. One is to approve it, and in which case, if it's approved, it can always be rescinded at the next town meeting or sooner if a member of the town were to submit it for an article and go through that process and get put back in front of town meeting, and it could be voted down and rescinded at that time. Or the town, and it sounds like there's no risk there, or
it's such a small risk, it'd be tough to quantify.
Somebody would have to race at light speed, or the other alternative is that the town votes it down and then the state takes some adverse action against the town that either costs us money in legal fees, results in lost grants, results in receivership, or a combination of all three, that becomes hard to pull back between that time and the time that the town meeting could come back again and say, oh, wait a second.
Point of order. Is there any way we can move this question so we can go on with the meeting? Thank you.
There's no point of orders in this meeting. This isn't town meeting, so I certainly understand that people want to hear about the rest of the articles, but this is kind of important, and a lot of people are going to be listening to this probably before town meeting, and they're going to want to know what are the pros and what are the cons, and I think it's important to flush that out, and I think this discussion is helpful.
Okay, so my understanding, going back to my question, is correct?
Yes.
Okay. And just one last question for Mr. Guimond. Is it your, and I'm sorry to ask you to speculate here, but is it your thought that if the SJC were to come back and give a decision in favor of the town of Milton, that the planning board would most likely reconvene and strongly reconsider its approval, if such approval is granted next week, of this recommendation?
My recommendation to the planning board would to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the advisory board? No. All right, any questions from the public?
Good evening, Larry Keene, 195 Cornhill Lane. Also, Mr. Guimond, I can't commend you enough the amount of work you've put into this. It's been a lot on your department and the planning board also. But when you said density of 16, why wouldn't we set it at the state minimum of 15? How did you come to the number of 16?
We had to go to 16 because of the area that we chose, and the state has very prescriptive, here's what you have to do for mapping to prove to the state that you could actually get 15 units per acre. And to do that, we had to bump it up to 16.
Okay. Now, also, there's 13 or 14 of these grants that have been talked about that the town may not be eligible for. It's been asked consistently, and we have not seen it yet, for each department to come forward and tell us exactly the amount of money that would be, within a mill or so, you know, but within a 5 or 10 year time frame, what the town has actually gotten in the last 5 or 10 years, what kind of money that really represents. We've never heard an actual number. I think the only number Mr. Guimond presented was 70,000, a particular grant that we may or may not be eligible for. So it would be good to have that number for town meeting so we could actually, you know, kind of decipher what we're going to do, the pros and the cons of it. As far as the legality to it, if Milton goes forward with this, whether they win, lose, or draw, if this is denied at town meeting, has anybody ever considered approaching the other towns that have already said no to this, such as Duxbury, our neighboring community, and getting involved with them and having multiple towns respond to the state legally, and kind of, instead of Marshfield fighting the town, fighting the state, have multiple towns get together and go after the state, that direction.
Do you mind if I answer that?
Yes, please.
So multiple towns submitted amicus briefs joining Milton over the issues that Milton was addressing.
Okay.
They filed briefs from Hamilton, from Middleborough, other towns. I can't even remember all of them that have filed briefs. The problem is our bylaw is different from Duxbury's. Even though it's the same topic as I talked about before, we've chosen a location that's really a location where it can't be built as a practical matter, or is so unlikely to be built that it's impractical to consider it being built. And if we join with other communities that don't share that exact same scenario, we're not situating ourselves with communities that are like us.
Yeah.
So I'm nervous about that. Do I think at some point other communities will take a poke? Yes, but I think the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, which I think involves every municipal attorney in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, takes the same view that this law is something that the state has a right to pass, but the manner in which it's being proposed to be implemented is defective. So there isn't a single community that I'm aware of that said that the state doesn't have a right to do this. And I haven't found any lawyers that say that the state doesn't have the right to do this, and I'm sure there were some pro se briefs that were filed, but they weren't written by lawyers that are familiar with the principles of federalism and how federal and state and local government communicates and rules itself. There isn't a good faith basis for a claim that the state doesn't have a right to enact this type of law.
Okay.
The major issue is how it's implemented and the defects in the legislation. And when Mr. Geeman was asked that question, because I remember how much money had we received, well, in the 4 initial programs that were identified in the original legislation, we didn't receive a lot of money, and I think our initial offhand...
None.
Yeah.
We didn't receive any money from the original.
Our initial reaction was, hey, do whatever you have to do. It's not going to hurt us. We'll go on without this. But as the state agency promulgated guidelines that said all these other programs you're not going to be eligible for, we had to start paying a lot more attention because it was the type of grant program. So I don't think we've actually had the opportunity to really understand which ones the state was going to make legal, but they just did that last week.
Yeah.
So we are going to have the dollars and cents as close as we can approximate for all of those additional 13 or 14 programs as to how much money we've received in the past and how much money we project to need in the future or where we might go to these things. Remember, this was a $4 billion economic development bill, and some money was earmarked for certain towns. About $100 million was allocated, I think, to the Seaport Economic Council. And, we would draw heavily on that money for dredging, because the North and the South rivers where we navigate, those silt up. We've been fortunate in getting FEMA money for Green Harbor, but at some point we may need more harbor dredging that's not FEMA money, and we will definitely want state money to do that.
Sure, absolutely. That, I definitely agree that that would be an important area to find out what money we've got.
And remember, and hopefully it won't be during our lifetimes, but in someone's lifetime or our children or our grandchildren's lifetime, if this climate change prediction comes true, Brant Rock something will have to happen in Brant Rock for us to protect ourselves, whether it's barricading our sewer treatment plant, elevating that, putting a waterproof barrier around it. This is a source, MassWorks would be a potential source of money for us to make those type of improvements.
Yeah, that's why, I think it's important that we have an actual, pretty close ballpark number as to what we're talking there for money, what the amount is over the last 5 or 10 years.
I think that we all agree. As a matter of fact, there's already memos circulating where we're trying to identify all of that very same information. So that's it's a great point, and I think the town meeting should know that.
Okay.
Bob, one thing that I think is confusing is there were original 4, they added 13, which I had addressed in a previous slide in previous discussions. Of those additional 13, only MVP, Planning Board, had gotten 2 different grants. The first one was like $70,000 or whatever, and the other one was smaller, $30,000, so it's in the $100,000 range. That's all. But what Bob is now talking about is additional grant sources that have been identified with the new bill.
Yep.
And he's saying 13 as well. I don't know if that's the number for the new bill, but to me, I think that's confusing to people because we've talked about 4 and 13 before, and Bob was talking about 13 more.
Yep.
So.
Well, clearly we are a coastal community, so that's going to be a lot of money. There's no question about that. One last question. How many communities do you know have already said no to this?
17.
So 17 have already opted out. And they
haven't opted out.
Well,
They've
said no,
refused
they've
to
denied.
pass the zoning.
You're correct, yeah. That's what I meant by it. Yeah, so 17 of them are, and a few more of them have gone the direction of approving them because of Milton, not being in fear of what was going to happen with Milton, correct?
I don't know if fear is the right way. I think that there are other communities like Hingham, Cohasset, that are similar to us, maybe a little bit different, that have come up with a location where they think it's probably unlikely to be built,
Yeah.
or they don't mind it being built, and said, would rather not have the impact to us, and we can find a spot for it, or we'll put it in a spot where it's not going to be built.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions from the public?
Thank you, Rick. This is a very controversial subject. My look at is that it requires your vote, and the state's bullying you into voting the way they want you to, and they're going to use economic pressure to do it. The bullies at Beacon Hill need to be taught a lesson in regards to how they treat their citizens in this state. This is a disgrace. Even our two representatives, as far as I know, voted in favor of this economic bill to allow the state to put pressure on the communities. You have a executive branch that is wielding a big stick over us, and it's unfortunate. My look at it is that we need to say no to this, and I would be more than happy to take this to the United States Supreme Court, and by listening to town council, I don't think he'd be the one to do it for us to get the job done, in my opinion. So I recommend everybody say no to this. Tell your state rep, your legislature, your executive branch, and the Attorney General, go pound sand. We're not going to be bullied into letting you do something in our community that we don't want, and we'll see where we go from there. Thank you.
We're going to move on to Article 13.
Rick, before we
Sorry.
move on, if you wouldn't mind.
Please.
This particular article requires a thoughtful approach. It doesn't require statements like pound sand to our Attorney General, and it requires a vote of our town meeting. So when our town meeting makes that vote, we as your elected board will do what is necessary to put the town in our best step forward. But this evening is about asking questions in regards to our articles. It is not necessarily about making statements, as our select board member has just made. So everybody here has the right to make their statements, but this is about our article that we have here, and I appreciate the efforts of our planning board and our advisory board and our select board, town council, and the rest of us for being here this evening. So I'd appreciate it, and I'm welcoming you to move to the next article. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fiddler. Moving on to Article 13.
I have a question. Bob Shaughnessy, Board of Public Works. There was a statement that said that so many communities went against it, but no one said how many communities went for it.
Mr. Galvin?
90?
90 communities have adopted this.
So there's 351 communities.
But that's because a lot of the Western Massachusetts communities are not obligated to pass this because of their size.
Okay. So everything like east of Worcester?
I forget the exact breakdown. I think it's more eastern than even that.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
It's like
there was
Metro West
Yeah.
and east of Metro West.
It would be good to have the list of grant programs that would be affected.
We'll have that exact number,
Yeah.
but it's more Metro, like Natick, Framingham, and east.
Okay, yeah, but then when you're talking about this 13 that didn't go for how many were for it versus against it? I mean, they just have the
Yeah.
balance.
Yesterday I saw it was 90 communities had adopted it and 17 had said no, but
Yeah, okay, thank
it may
you.
be more than that.
Bob, it's where the MBTA railroad stations are, so Gardner and stuff, it does go a little further out.
Greg, is there only 177 communities involved in this?
Yeah.
So 90 out of 177.
Well, some communities aren't obligated to do anything this year, and they're obligated to do next year, given the size. So that's why other communities haven't done it.
All right, we're moving on to Article 13. Greg, before we read these, Article 13, Article 14 are in association with this MBTA rezoning?
Yes, so I was going to let the town moderator know for 12, 13, and 14 should be grouped together. 15, 16, 17 should be grouped together. 19, 20, and 21 should be grouped together. 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, and 21. 18 is all by itself.
15, 16, 17, and you said 20 and 21 are separate?
Just 18 is separate. 19, 20, and 21 are all related as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Can you give
I'm going
us
to be very brief on the next
Please.
one because it is the map change.
Okay,
So,
thank you. All right. Article 13, Article 14.
Article 14 is just the table of use change to tell everybody if you're going to be building one of these, this is where you go in the bylaw.
And just again, to make sure that I'm clear, these are all things that are still going before the planning board for a final vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions from the advisory board? 13, 14 from the public? Having none. Article 15, let's do Article 15, 16 then if we're doing these together. Article 15, 16, and 17?
Yes.
Thank you.
So 15 is the text to the residential accessory apartments. The 16 is the definition, and 17 is the table of use change. These are the articles, well, these are the articles that we had a lot of last-minute comments from the Board of Appeals. So we had all 7 members of the Board of Appeals go to the planning board meeting, join that meeting, and it had a number of questions in a bunch of different directions. We're not sure if we're going to be able to address. Typically in the past, we've been told if the planning board is presenting an article, we are not to make floor amendments on floor meeting, town meeting, we should withdraw the article. The planning board basically, I think, I wouldn't say the word overwhelmed, but the more issues that had been popped up on the ADU, the board members were kind of like, we got to think on this one. Do we want to just bring it to town meeting and let outside people do floor amendments? Do we want to withdraw the article? The downside to withdrawing the article is February 2nd, the state's ADU law kicks in. And the reason the planning board presented or brought these articles forward was just like the MBTA zoning, we wanted to do the best to protect our town. ADUs can count against us. We're just at 10%, and these ADU units, each individual one that's built, is going to count against us in the next U.S. Census, which is in 2030, unless we get our GLAM, and the GLAM is the land area calculation. So you have 2 ways of addressing affordable housing for the state for 40Bs. First one is 10% of your housing units, which we have now achieved. The second, which is more permanent because it's not every 10 years when the census comes out, once you have that land area calculation, that's the other way that the town can say no to an unfriendly 40B. So that is part of the reason why the planning board drafted these regulations. It was to protect the town.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Any questions from the advisory board on Articles 15, 16, or 17? Having none, any questions from the public?
Greg, is the ADU, is it a law or something that the town has to vote on to accept, much like the MBTA article?
There is not a requirement to go to town meeting like the MBTA. The way that was drafted, you're supposed to go to town meeting. But what this is saying is we currently have residential apartments as an accessory use by special permit. The law is saying we have to do it by right, but the law says you can put in setback density, whatever, you can have certain restrictions, height restrictions, and et cetera, which is what the planning board's article was trying to do.
So it's requires the vote of the people to pass this at town meeting?
Yes.
Much like the MBTA?
Yes, but it
Okay.
doesn't, there isn't language that says you have to go to town meeting. It just says what you have, meaning the special permit process, no longer exists.
Can you email me that, whatever the legislator put together for you?
The language?
Yep.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Larry Keene, 195 Cornhill. What is the GLAM number that we're trying to achieve?
Let's see if I can get this off the top of my head. I think it's 1.5% of the total land area after you remove all federal, state, and town-owned lands.
And where are we at now with that?
We were very close to 1.5, but it sounds like we may have a modification to a 40B that we've approved under one scenario that may go to another, and that might drop us back a little lower. The problem with the GLAM area is you get more credit for the land that's developed as 40B than you do the town-owned land. So you have to buy more town land than if you had, say, if you had 10 acres of a 40B or 30 acres of 40B, you'd have to have about 150 to 200 acres of open space to get that GLAM number to get to the 1.5.
So as I understand, my impression is that that GLAM number is really the number that we want. The 10% is always going to be a changing target. That the GLAM is really
GLAM
what
is what we
should be
really
going for.
want. 10% is our protection.
Yeah. And we are going that we are going the right direction.
We are going in that direction, yes.
Which is good news.
So
Okay.
when you get the chance to buy open space, buy open space.
Sure. Last night at the planning board meeting that went on last night, the Zoom meeting here, one of the issues was the site plan approval being with the planning board. And the conversation was that all of the restrictions and limitations and the bylaws are already in the zoning bylaws, that they have to meet their setbacks and minimum lot coverage and maximum lot coverage. All of that is built into this bylaw already, that the applicant should be able to just go to the building department, and if he meets all current zoning requirements, that there should be no need of it to go to planning board. That at that point, with the $200 fee for the application to be in front of the board, on top of bringing an attorney, an engineer, or whatever, that would be a cost that would be redundant and that it wouldn't be necessary. The planning board members appeared to take that seriously, and that's pretty much the reason it kicked off till the 2nd or the 3rd, whenever the next meeting is. Is that correct?
I would not say that's a completely correct statement. There were a number of issues that were raised. I have asked town council, what is our protection if we do not have language for site plan review? And as we did state last night, part of the reason we said site plan review is because it's currently a special permit, and we've been told we need to go by right. And we felt to protect the town and not to get overwhelmed with accessory dwelling units, because the rumors were going around town that anybody can do anything, we can all have accessory units. That is not what the state law said, and the planning board felt when we drafted this that it was better to try to protect the town and residents, especially abutters, for setbacks, land area, et cetera, calcs.
But I just don't understand it, where it's in here that it's pretty much written in, minimum yard setbacks, maximum building coverage, minimum open space per district defined, non-conforming structure. It's all right there already.
Is that in what we wrote?
I'm reading it, right, number 6, if you want to get out number 6.
Which is what we wrote.
Correct, but now why would we?
Which is why we would have those protections, because we prepared a site plan review versus our current site plan approval process, which is a special permit, which is why we had to create a new section to put it in someplace that it wasn't special permit.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but wouldn't the building commissioner be confirming that as part of his permitting process?
The building commissioner could potentially do this.
Okay.
But we decided when we drafted this, it was better to take that extra step to understand how many units we're looking at, and do we need to do anything else to protect the town?
As far as protecting the town goes, but if this is passed, again, the protections are right there, that all this is adding.
If it is not passed, which is potential, then we have no language.
Yeah.
So one of the other comments was we could turn it back to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the current board that reviews the special permit.
But this isn't going to be on a special permit. This is going to be by right, correct?
By right with site plan review.
The site plan review was added by the state if the town wanted to make that as a requirement, correct?
Correct.
It wasn't a state requirement. This is a requirement that's being put in by the town. I'm just looking at if these units are going to be built.
The state allows site plan review and allows the town to put in setbacks and other requirements, which is exactly what we have done.
Yep, I get it. My point is that I just think that this is going to be a redundant process that is going to cost the applicant, the taxpayer, the property owner. And as we discussed last night, the fee is $200, and I had proposed that if this was going to be, that the planning board would waive that $200 fee. The planning board unanimously did not want to waive that $200 fee, considering the board needs to be funded, the town needs to be funded. I get all that. But $200 from a taxpayer turns into $1,000 pretty quick when you have to bring an attorney or a lawyer with you to this.
Mr. Gaiman, you don't have to respond. All questions will be directed to the chair, just as a reminder. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
And as a reminder, as Ms. Fidler reminded us, that this is a session for questions, and we're offering the public the opportunity to ask those questions. So if you have any other questions, sir.
Yeah, okay. Pre-existing units, if there's already a pre-existing unit on the property, would there be an opportunity for those to be grandfathered, that if they're pre-existing non-conforming, meaning they don't meet all the zoning requirements, but it's already there,
Mr.
would we
Hammond?
be able to legitimize those units?
So we tried many years ago to have a pre-existing clause. It failed at a town meeting previously. We did not have language in there for pre-existing, but someone can come in and ask for a accessory apartment. It may be pre-existing. We would review it to make sure that it had its proper setbacks, et cetera, and then it would be approved by right. It does not require a public hearing. It would be, as I had mentioned before, scheduled in a regular planning board meeting.
Yep, it says here in 13, pre-existing non-conforming accessory buildings shall be moved to conform to the front, side, and rear setbacks when used as an ADU.
What, is there a question?
The question is there some way that could be changed to make it that a pre-existing unit would not need to be moved if it's pre-existing? That would be my question.
Mr. Gaiman, is there any way to change that, or this is what's been submitted and this is what the article is?
That was what's submitted. As I said, there were multiple things that were brought up at the public meeting last night. The language that he's referring to is if I have an accessory building and I want to make it an accessory apartment, nothing saying that it was already accessory apartment in there. It was just if you have an accessory building, because this is the first time this town will allow accessory buildings to have accessory apartments. The comment was to move, if you have a shed or a barn or whatever, move it out of the side yard setbacks to protect your neighbors, and you can have your accessory unit. That's what that was after. Some places we have sheds that are right on property lines.
Thank you, Mr. Guimon.
And one last thing, they have the accessory units being 50% of the total gross floor or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. 900 square feet, one of the public comments last night was 900 square feet appears to be kind of small. Would there be a mechanism where that could be increased to possibly, say, a maximum of 1,200 square feet, or as the current bylaw is for an accessory unit inside the dwelling to be 40% of the main dwelling?
Mr. Guimon? State law is very specific on this matter. It is 900 square feet or 50% of the building, whichever is smaller. State law does have a clause that says you could have an additional accessory unit by special permit. The planning board chose not to go in that direction at this time. The planning board also stated that they have yet to pass regulations. They stated multiple times in their public session recently for the ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, that they are going to pass regulations, and that's partially because I believe they know they're in trouble with their guidelines with the Milton case, and that they should have done regulations for MBTA as well. Once those regulations come out, the planning board has said we will have to come back and revisit this, and we may have to make additional changes to the accessory apartment bylaw. It was also said last night that after a year or two, regardless of the guidelines, if it comes that there is no great wave of accessory units and no great problems, that we could then take it to town meeting and turn it over to either the Board of Appeals or the building department.
Thank you, Mr. Guimon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Guimon, in regards to your comment, in regards to this discussion in regards to 40B, on these accessory apartments, if this article so passes, couldn't you make the accessory dwellings part of the affordable to make it 10% number?
We would have to come up with some type of rent control structure or something in order to do something along that nature. Again, that was not in the state language for the ADU, so we did not go there.
Yeah, but that would benefit the towns in reaching their 10%, right?
It would benefit the towns, but the state did not put that in as something that we could do.
So what you're saying to me is, it sounds like, is that you're letting the state dictate everything to us, but you don't want to, but you yourself or the board or anybody else doesn't want to take the initiative to get us to that threshold if it was possible.
I would say not take the initiative isn't the best way of saying it. It's clear what the state is telling us we as communities can do with ADUs.
Yes,
and
is the problem.
We were trying to meet that threshold.
I think you explained everything right there, Greg. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Brian Murphy, Elm Street. Just had a question, Greg. So why wouldn't this be able to just go directly to the building commissioner or the building department? Why does it have to go to the planning?
Mr. Guimon?
Again, because we are going from a special permit process and very small numbers to a by right process, which we could have a large number of ADUs come in fairly quickly. And it's sort of to let's get a handle on this, what is going to happen, what's our data, and what do the state regulations say when they're passed. And then we can decide what to do with, the process.
But it could go to the building department.
It could go to the building department.
The article could
It could go
remain
to
the
the
same.
zoning board of appeals. It could go to the select board.
Yeah.
If you guys want it, have at it.
So it can go to the building department. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Article 18. Mr. Guimon? Could you walk us, I'd read it, but it's a lot of legalese, so.
Okay, so 2020, I think it was, the planning board and attorney Steve Gard, we were reworking the Water Resource Protection District, and we were asked, could we have one-stop shopping instead of when you need a WRPD special permit, you come to the planning board, but you have to also go to the Board of Appeals for site plan approval. Is there a way we could do one-stop shopping? So we drafted language, and we basically said, when you need a new water resource protection district, the planning board will take over the site plan approval process as well, so you don't have to go to the Board of Appeals. But the key to that was only when you need to have a new special permit in the WRPD from the planning board. Since then, it was interpreted that way. Recently, it has been interpreted differently, and we were asked to take Lucetti's changes that they would like to do, and Starbucks changes that they would like to do. And the planning board's like, neither of these need a special permit from the planning board. Why do they have to come to the planning board for this? They should be going to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So this article is to try to clarify that's what the language meant when we changed it in 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Guimon. Advisory Board, any questions on Article 18? Having none, any questions from the public? None, we'll move on to Articles 19 and 20 and 21. Mr. Guimon?
So recently, we were at work and we saw plans for a battery energy storage system, or BESS. This was a rather large facility that was going to be located next to the elementary school in the Zone 2 for the Furnace Brook wells. When we looked at these, the site plan, these were large metal, not structures, but things in the open, and then they had all these recharging battery stations next for the cars. I understand why they're necessary, et cetera, but having done a little research, the battery energy storage systems themselves have caught fire in a number of locations and have chemicals and stuff in them that we felt should be directed away from the water resource protection districts or our Zone 2s for our wells. So that's what these changes are basically trying to direct them out of our Zone 2 to more appropriate places in case of accident or problems.
Thank you. Questions from the Advisory Board on Articles 19, 20, 21? Having none, any from the public?
Andrew Stewart, Building Commissioner. Will this article prohibit small-scale residential users from having energy storage systems at their property for residential use, or is this for larger scale or kind of non-residential use?
The intent is larger scale things. It was not meant for individual homes.
Thank you. If no other questions on Articles 19, 20, and 21, we'll move on to Article 22. Article 22, will the town vote to rescind prior authorization on Article 4, ATM 422, 2024 for 2 Chevrolet Colorado PU trucks in the amount of $45,000 each, and authorize the DPW superintendent to purchase in place thereof 2 Chevrolet Silverado PU trucks in the amount of $53,162 per vehicle for a total of $106,324, and to fund this purchase by transfer from wastewater retained earnings or take any other action relative thereto. Do we have a representative from the Board of Public Works?
Sean Patterson, I'm the DPW superintendent, and currently we can't get the Colorado pickup trucks. They're just not, they're 2 years out from the factory. So these half-ton pickups are available to us now, so we want to switch and get those.
Why aren't the pickups available?
I can't answer that. I don't know. With this today's society, we're having a hard time getting vehicles as dump trucks, excavators, anything. Takes 2 years to get them.
And is these Chevrolet Silverado PU trucks, are these the...
They're on the
pickup trucks?
lot.
Understood. Are these the closest thing that exists next to these ones?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the advisory board? Any questions from the public? All right, moving on, Article 23. Will the town vote to, number one, amend the total project cost to upgrade the Plymouth Avenue wastewater pump station from $8.1 million as approved at town meeting Article 8 to a total project cost of $9 million? And two, to meet this appropriation, authorize the treasurer collector with the approval of the select board to borrow all or a portion of up to $8.1 million from the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust pursuant to Chapter 29C of Massachusetts General Law and issue general obligation bonds therefore, with debt service to be defrayed by the Wastewater Enterprise Fund, and further, three, to utilize $2.3 million previously authorized ARPA funds, and four, accept any state or federal grants for the project, which grant amounts received prior to the issuance of bonds or notes shall be used to reduce the amount borrowed. Said funds to be expended under the direction of the Superintendent of Public Works and general supervision of the Board of Public Works, or take any action relative thereto. Mr. Patterson.
At this time, the project is underway at the Plymouth Ave pump station. We encountered some issues with the electrical conduits or conductors. They are failing, and we didn't realize that at the beginning of the project. We found it as we dug into it. So going forward, we want to replace all three conductors, the wires that go to it, to the pole, and also do some more rehab on the wet well itself. So we only had one filed subbidder that bid on the project, and with the estimated cost that he gave us was a little bit over than we expected. So we want to still have the contingency that we need for any further issues that we have down the road, and also pay for the extras that we need to get fixed now.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Questions from the advisory board? No questions from the advisory board. Any questions from the public? Moving on to Article 24, Mr. Patterson. Will the town vote to authorize the Select Board of Selectmen to accept/acquire by gift, deed, conveyance, or otherwise a certain parcel of land with the buildings and improvements thereon containing approximately 1 acre of land, more or less, known as numbered 829 Old Main Street Extension, shown the Town of Marshfield Assessor's Map, and described in a deed recorded in the Plymouth County Registers of Deeds in Book 36204, and further to appropriate the sum of $765,200 or such other sums together with all costs and expenses of acquisition, including attorney's fees, and to meet said appropriation, transfer said sums from water retained earnings, and further to authorize the town, acting by and through its select board and or Board of Public Works, to apply for and or accept any state or federal grants connected with the acquisition of said property being acquired for water supply protection purposes pursuant to Mass General Law and Article 97 of the amendments to the Massachusetts Constitution under the control of the Board of Public Works, or take any other action relative thereto. Oh, Mr.
Bob Shaughnessy, the Chair of the Board of Public Works.
Thank you, sir.
This parcel is a postage stamp surrounded by all water supply land, and it's at the entrance of a Furnace Brook Well 2. So once you go into it, it's right on Old Main Street. Everything else is water supply around land around it. The house was up for sale. The owners agreed to do the assessment price is the assessment value. And it's a great buy, because if we don't buy it, someone's going to buy it, put a new septic system in. With all the PFAS and everything else out there, we can't afford to have it. It's butting the Zone 1. It's right outside the Zone 1, right into Zone 2. So it's a water supply protection article.
Thank you, sir. Advisory Board, any questions on Article 24? Having none, any questions from the public?
Mr. Shaughnessy, or maybe Sean, one of you can answer this. When you're buying this house, how far out does this water protection area go?
It goes all the way up to Carolina Hill. But this particular piece of property is abutting the Zone 1. Zone 1 is 400 feet from the well.
Okay.
So basically, you have a septic system right into your cone of influence that goes into your well.
So
It doesn't make sense to allow it to be rehabbed and put a septic system in there.
So you're saying that abuts the
Furnace
Zone
Brook
1?
Well 2.
What's that?
Furnace Brook Well 2. It's right at the entrance of 3A, Old Main Street.
Oh, no, I got a map here. I see where it is.
And the driveway that goes into the well, in the pump station. And the pump station is where the well is.
Have you looked, because I see that you're looking to purchase 829, but then and I see that there's an article here to unload 1929 Main Street.
That's on the other side of the hill. That goes down into the North River. It has nothing to do with the well fields.
So,
it's across from ABC Equipment.
yep. So it's so there's a big difference between purchasing this land and the other one that the town's
absolutely.
looking to let go.
Right.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
No? Okay, thank you.
Having none, move on to Article 25. Article 25, will the town vote to amend the Marshfield Town Code Division 2 General Bylaws, Chapter 285, Water, Paragraph 19.1, notice to towns certain work prohibited within Zone 1 by adding the bold type language to the first paragraph as set forth below, or take any other action relative thereto. I would note that the only bold-faced language in the paragraph below is the addition of building commissioner. Mr. Patterson, can you let us know why that's been added?
The Board of Public Works thought it was necessary to add the building commissioner along with all the other department heads that are involved in that amendment of the bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Questions from the advisory board?
So what is it that the building commissioner would enable you or give you certain protections, or what's the point of adding him?
When it comes to this bylaw, he should be involved in the process as well as I am, the Board of Health, he should be involved as well in any decision-making or anybody that brings anything forward to the town.
It's an inclusion issue. Bob Shaughnessy, Board of Public Works, it's an inclusion issue. He sees a lot of building going on in the town. So by having him not in the loop, it could be, it's an inclusion issue. This basically include those people that will see what vendors come in, and I'm not sure how I'm not sure how to put it in words, but if everybody else is going to be looking at it, why keep him out of the loop? Keep him in the loop. It's an inclusion issue.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Andrew Stewart, Building Commissioner. I can, the purpose of that bylaw is basically to say that any construction that's happening in the WRPD, that those contractors are required to give us lists of materials that might contain PFAS, how they're going to remedy that situation. Without the building department kind of in the loop, I was really only sending that information to them as a courtesy, which we ended up working into it, but this kind of ensures that even if our current systems change in the future, that the building department will be in the loop to send the information about PFAS and all these other chemicals to the Board of Public Works, the Board of Health, et cetera.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Moving on to Article 26. Article 26, will the town vote to amend Marshfield Town Code Division 2 General Bylaws, Chapter 34, Boating and Waterways, Paragraph 34.5, Mooring Regulations, by striking the current language in Paragraph B that is identified in bold type and rewarding it as set forth in the new Paragraph B below under the phrase amended language, or take any other action relative thereto. So the current language, bold type here is Board of Selectmen persons on the wait list shall reapply annually between April 15th and June 30th of each calendar year. Renewals must be in person, and there's some amended language added here. Is the harbor master here to be able to address this?
Good evening, I'm Mike DeMayo, harbor master. Yes, sir. So this article is more of a house cleaning things up. So during COVID, it was hard for people to go to town hall to sign the wait list, which is pretty much archaic. So now, if we can move to an online system where folks can sign the list, it'll prevent 300 people from going to town treasurer's office, signing a list that can be put online much easier and streamlined.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Questions from the advisory board? No questions at this time from the advisory board. Any questions from the public on Article 26? Oh, okay. All right. Nope. All right, we're in for another round. All right, so we'll move on to Article 27. Article 27, will the town vote to amend Marshfield Town Code Division 2 General Bylaws, Chapter 34, Boating and Waterways, Paragraphs 34 through 6, General Regulations for Town Waterways, by striking the current languages in paragraphs C, K, and R that is identified in bold type and rewording these paragraphs as set forth in the new paragraphs C, K, and R below under the phrases amended language. Mr. Harbor Master, could you please provide us a update on C, K, and R, or a briefing?
Yep, yes, absolutely. So this is just some house cleaning on the articles that were written back in 2008, cleaning things up a little bit to make it sound a little more presentable and a little neater to the bylaw versus kind of choppy written, that's all.
Thank you. Board, any questions? Advisory board? Yep. Any questions from the public on Article 27?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the last article, Article 28. Will the town vote to approve the amended South Shore Regional Vocational School District Regional Agreement, which is on file in the town clerk's office, or take any other action relative thereto? Mr. Maresco.
Yes, Michael Moresco, 201 Arlington Street. This amendment changes the town debt share calculation from a fixed 3-year look back of enrolled students to a 4-year rolling average look back of enrolled students. The 4-year rolling average adjusts for shifts in the enrollment over time. To account for the 4-year rolling average, Marshfield's annual adjustment calculation will run through fiscal 32. Starting in fiscal 33, its debt share will be calculated using the 4-year rolling average. At that point, there will be comparable enrollment history to other towns regarding grades 9 through 12. And this will be voted on all of the communities will be changing, going from the 3-year to a 4-year rolling average.
Thank you, Mr. Maresco. Any questions from the advisory board on Article 28?
So we're going from a 3-year rolling average to a 4-year rolling average starting in fiscal year 32?
That is correct.
Okay, got it. And what's kind of driving that? Wouldn't we be able to catch up sooner, or do we have slower enrollment in the school just because we're new entrants, or what's kind of driving the 3-year out to 32?
Well, it's the whole district. All the 9 schools will be changing. But just for, in September, we had 31 kids from Marshfield enroll in the school, compared to when we were out of the district, we only could have 2 or 3, depending upon what empty seats we had.
Thank you, Mr. Maresco. Advisory board, any other questions on Article 28? Any questions from the public on Article 28? Seeing no questions, we're complete with reviewing the articles. I'll make a quick remark, and then I'll pass the mic over to Ms. Fiddler. First of all, I'd like to thank the Select Board, the Advisory Board, and all of the members from the public, all of those that are watching online or through Community Access Television for your time and patience tonight. The Advisory Board has a responsibility to provide apolitical recommendations to the town based upon a careful consideration of each one of these articles. And I realize that can take some time because each of these articles, and there's a lot of them, as we just went through tonight, there's 28 in total, right? 28 we just got done with. These all change people's lives, many of them. Some of them don't have much of a change, but a lot of them, they change and impact people's lives in one way or the other in this town. They set a precedent, and they say a lot about who we are and what we're trying to do. And as part of having transparent government, I think it's incredibly important that we have these discussions no matter how long they take, even if it takes us to the 10 o'clock hour, in order to make sure that all questions can be asked and that these discussions can happen in a transparent way. So that way, when it does go to town meeting and advice is provided, that the townspeople have at least been given a recommendation and be given the opportunity to let their questions be heard prior to their opportunity to vote and make a final decision in the matter. So thank you again to everybody for your patience tonight, and I appreciate it, Mrs. Fiddler.
Yes, I'd like to end the evening with just a short remark. It's kind of unfortunate that here we are at the joint advisory meeting between the Select Board and the Advisory Board and members of the public when we have a very small attendance. It is remarkably shocking to me that we have so many important articles that our town needs to be aware of, and that this isn't a great opportunity for questions to be asked and answered. So as I said before, questions are part of how we get information to make educational choices, and it's important that we do our homework going towards town meeting. This is important for our town. I don't want to labor it, and we have so many people that are really working hard in our town to do what's best. And we have 3 members of the Select Board. We don't all think alike, as you can probably guess, but we're here to support the town, and whatever the town determines at our town meeting, we'll do our best to go forward. But for this evening, I appreciate everybody being here, and I'd like Jim Fitzgerald to finish off the evening and set the tone for going into town meeting.
Are we on? There we go. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here and all the people who are watching on Zoom and Marshfield Cable. This was a lot more of an advisory board, select board hearing than we're used to. Usually these are pretty quick events, but I thought there's a lot of really good discussion this evening. The discussion that, you know, if people pay attention now, you can make some educated decisions going into town meetings, so maybe some of these discussions that are had here and not at town meetings. So when you get into the MBTA article, you get into some of the other zoning articles, that everybody's gotten a good flavor of what's out there right now and what we're going to be considering. And I know that if you look at some of these discussions, they were quite long, but I thought they were very informative and really covered a lot of ground that I like to see. I like to learn from what our town officials know and what the people in the audience know, and I think that's a valuable part of going into town meeting. So I'm assuming that town meeting is not going to be the 24 people that are here. So I hope that all you at home enjoyed looking at this meeting and getting some information, and look forward to seeing you on the 16th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzgerald. As a reminder, the town meeting is going to be on December 16th at 7 p.m. It will be right here in this very, no, wait a second. It's going to be the auditorium and the gym? Wait a second. Which one is it going to be? Both? Okay. Okay, so the primary meeting will be in here with overflow in the gym?
Yes, you have to be in the auditorium to speak. You don't?
Can you speak in the microphone for the folks on Zoom, please, Mr. Maresco? Thank you.
We're spending money on technology, so people in the gym will be able to see the auditorium will be able to see the gym, and people won't have to run back and forth. We'll be able to accommodate well over 2,000 people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maresco. As someone who loves this town very deeply and as the chair of the advisory board, I encourage all my fellow citizens of the town of Marshfield to attend, everybody that can, and take the time, understand these articles, attend select board meetings and advisory board meetings where these are discussed, other meetings throughout the town, and make sure that you're educated so that way your vote will count based upon being educated as to the pluses and minuses for each one. With that being said, I would ask if there is a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second? We have a second. The meeting is so adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.